is a baby. It's fickle. It cries.
And a 1-degree change might mean a very, very serious fever.
And yet, humans have long since called it Mother Earth.
Believing our world to be a bountiful, all-giving guardian. Efforts to realize the limits of our world and to take action for the environment has been a fairly recent trend. Just 12 years ago, the United Nations created the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 ambitious objectives for the UN member states to secure the rights and well-being of everyone living on a healthy, thriving planet by 2030. Out of the 244 indicators of our progress towards these goals, 93 of them are related to the environment. Then 8 years ago, countries signed the Paris Climate Agreement. Article 2, Clause 1A of the article reads, to hold increase of global temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius. But despite continuous efforts by many nations, environmental sustainability has not yet been achieved, and pollution is haunting the world. As of the year 2023, the global temperatures have risen up to 1.18 degrees Celsius, creeping up the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit set by the Paris Climate Agreement. And as for the 2030 UN SDGs, they are nowhere near completion. The main reason for this is that in a rush to minimize pollution and take action for the environment, we often forget that countries are not just countries. They are entities comprised of individual human beings. But more importantly, the private's interests and the public's interests, or what an individual wants and what is good for society as a whole, are often incompatible, and making changes on an individual level has become a difficult thing to do. We aren't inherently selfish. As defined by Collins' dictionary, this trait is the prioritization of one's interests, benefits, and welfare, often by disregarding others. This trait, while evolutionarily advantageous for individual survival, becomes a little problematic when it comes to considering collective well-being, particularly in the context of environmental sustainability. And individuals only have just a vague idea of how they actually need to do to take action. Then why? Why do we act in our self-interest? Is self-seeking behavior ever compatible with pursuing the greater good? Will we ever stop being selfish? I believe that finding answers to these questions will help us realize the solutions to the world's most pressing problems around the world. In scientific terms, this paradoxical situation where an individual implicitly recognizes the need to act for the environment, but apparently does not act in accordance with this belief, is called cognitive dissonance, which is when a person's behavior and beliefs do not complement with or are dissonant to each other. When we face conflicting beliefs, we feel discomfort. And thus, we rationalize our actions by justifying them. eventually making a paradox between our private and public selves, leading us down the slippery slope of less and less responsible actions. The first justification that we make is assuming that others will perform the task instead of us, neutralizing the ramifications of our own inactions. We tell ourselves, even though I am not using a reusable bag for this particular shopping trip, that's not of a big deal for the environment because plenty of others are already using reusable bags instead of me. The second justification that we make is by blaming external circumstances, and that these circumstances have deterred us from performing the action. Wesley Schultz, a social psychologist from California State University, posits that the further away someone is from a trash bin, the more likely they are to litter. Mentioning the absence of trash bins as to why they littered. In fact, this goes against the assumption that we make about litterers, that they litter because they just don't care about the environment. Oftentimes, people do care, but it's too much of a hassle, it's inconvenient, and so people do litter even though they might care about the environment. Ironically, this paradox slightly shifts its trajectory when it is applied to people other than us. We impose harsher judgment on other people's selfish actions, resulting in the ultimate double standard. In a research experiment conducted by Hansmann and Steimer, this behavior is defined as self-serving bias. In the experiment, 71% of the participants reported that they have littered in the past. When they were asked to explain why they littered, they mentioned external circumstances, like the absence of trash bins. From this, we can also draw a parallel from Schultz's article about littering. Then, when the participants were asked to explain why others might have littered, they highlighted negative inherent attributes like ignorance and naivety. When we are forced to make a trade-off between pursuing our own self-interest through inherent mechanisms like self-serving bias and pursuing our personal convenience and the collective well-being, the public interest is important, but not at the expense of sacrificing personal freedom. Then, what if I told you that these two traits are not mutually exclusive? Selfishness isn't a value to be avoided. It is the product of humans' innate logic that has been developed over many generations. And therefore, it must be embraced and strategically used to create the most environmentally sustainable solution. When we face conflicting beliefs, we feel discomfort, which connects back to what I explained about cognitive dissonance. When an individual is presented with two conflicting factors, the desire to pursue environmental sustainability and the desire to pursue their personal convenience, they will most likely choose the option that provides the greater convenience for them. Oftentimes, people prioritize the option that brings greater convenience to them because the urgency of the other alternative does not ring immediately. To us, the world is still Mother Earth, not the fickle, fever-prone child that we must seek to protect. and individuals still have only a vague image of what taking action for the environment really means. Another problem in the current paradigm of environmental sustainability is that when we hear the two words, selfish and selfless, it seems that these two words don't really go along with each other, situated at opposite extremes. To avoid this kind of binary thinking, I prefer to use the word altruism instead of selflessness. In fact, actions that benefit the public can also benefit the private interests. And we should realize that acting selfishly and acting altruistically can be harmonious. They are not in complete opposition. Then, how can we go beyond the vague image of just taking action for the environment and for sustainability, and also achieve harmony between acting selfishly and altruistically? On an individual level, one should find the most altruistic, environmentally sustainable solution that is both accessible and convenient for them. For individuals, this might be something as simple as riding electric bicycles. The fact that riding electric bikes reduces hundreds and millions of barrels of oil per day seems to be an interesting fact to know. But that doesn't really motivate us to ride electric bikes. But then, what if I told you this? Riding electric bikes reduces your inconvenience of walking and also saves your wallet from spending hundreds of dollars on car oil and maintenance per year. Just now, the prospect of riding electric bikes has become more attractive just because the convenience and personal relevance has increased. Then, on an individual level, we have mentioned simple solutions. Then, what can governments and corporations do to incentivize ones that promote environmental sustainability? An example of this is the government providing subsidies for individuals who switch to electric vehicles for transportations, and also subsidize companies that switch to renewable energy sources. The Korean Ministry of Environment, for instance, already has a subsidy program that citizens can apply when purchasing an electric vehicle. And the annual budget for this program is 1.734 trillion won. Plato once described a metaphor of the human mind as a tug-of-war between two horses. The majestic horse, which represents pure-heartedness and mobility, and the evil horse, which represents our base desires and selfish passions. The majestic horse is in continuous struggle to keep the evil horse under control. When we apply this metaphor of the human mind to the clash between the public and the private interests, we could say that the majestic horse represents the public interests, which requires altruism, and the evil horse can be represented by the private interests, which incorporates selfishness. We are inherently selfish, and we have cognitive dissonance, but we aren't perfect still. It is the nature of us as humans that drives the clash between the public to pursue sustainability, and the private interests to pursue convenience. But remember, the metaphorical struggle between the majestic and the evil horse can be managed through leveraging selfishness one step at a time. Thank you.